Great. So thank you all for joining us today. So this is actually incredibly exciting for me. So just a tiny bit of my background. I'm the CEO of York Exponential. So we're a collaborative robotics company. So we focus mostly on human-sized robots that are smaller, that are designed to work next to people. But one of our other large missions is workforce. So one of the big problems we've seen in manufacturing and agriculture is this lack of, one, a skilled workforce, but also a desire to do those kinds of jobs. So we also have a school where we're training the first generation of robot mechanics. So this idea of having people that were left behind previously by technology but can be included now is incredibly important. So that's why things like edge technology, things that allow technology to be accessible to smaller communities or people that before were left behind all over the world is really incredible to us. So I'm extremely excited. So Janet, do you want to start and give a little bit of your background?
Sure. So my background, I just grew up in the Silicon Valley, and I'm from the tech industry. Spent my last 10 years in various different companies, 10 to 15 years. I started my career in Apple, went to work for eBay, and then in Yahoo, I spent about 8 years in Yahoo. Hadoop was invented in my team, and then from there on, I went to Western Digital to really take them on a data journey. And I hope I can share a lot of that with you later today.
Awesome, thank you. And Miku, please tell us a little bit about your background and your startup.
Sure. Yeah, my background is also in tech, and I've done 4 startups before this, and they've had pretty successful ones. Apart from startups, I worked for companies like VMware and IBM, and led the initiative to actually virtualize the mobile phones for the first time, which was mobile virtualization product. But somehow, during my last tenure at IBM, I was leading IBM's IoT initiative, and a lot of work was happening to bring some of those values back to ag because of the drought and efforts around irrigation sensors and all of that, which is what got me to come up with a different perspective on how you could bring technology to solve some of the challenges in food and ag. And it grew really big in my head or in my mission. And I just wanted to take a first step from my perspective and try to connect the dots between tech and food. That's how AgShift came about. And hopefully I can share a little bit more on what we are doing with AgShift.
That's awesome. Well, thank you very much. So there's a couple interesting things happening here because Western Digital is a very large company. You guys are 40 years old?
Yeah, yes, 40 years.
40. And then your company is how old?
2.2.
2.2 years, okay. So both similar missions, but using this technology. So I think what might be neat is to dive in to what it was like when you came on in 2014, what the technology was like, some of the challenges you had in adopting and getting it to this point, and then maybe talk about the difference of actually building a company and what you've learned on this technology from the ground up. So they both seem like very unique challenges, but it could be incredible opportunities for everyone in this room. So, Janet.
So when I arrived at Western Digital, just from a backdrop, I had just finished 8 years in Yahoo. I was processing about 14 petabytes of data in a single day. Imagine the entire Library of Congress data being processed on a Hadoop platform. And Hadoop was invented in Yahoo. So while I was in Yahoo, the major systems, production systems were breaking. We had all this petabyte of data. We had to resolve how to solve this. And we had a live site. So coming from that experience, so I had already done big data before the world caught on to what big data was. Right. Yahoo was processing so much of that. Arriving in Western Digital, they had no clue what big data was. And they said, Janet, we've got all this data. It's sitting in manufacturing. And I said, where's your data? And they said, this is sitting in different geolocations in various factories, China, Japan, Malaysia, Thailand. And basically, these are images. Right? So we're talking about wafers. We're talking about semiconductor industry and device physics. Now, this is not my background. My background is search. My background is Apple, eBay, that background. So here I come in, and of course I had strong support from the CEO because the CEO decided that he was going to leave a legacy of this company, Western Digital, to become a data-driven company. And so he had envisioned that, and that's why he brought me in. Right. And so, but now I had to start educating everybody who knew nothing about big data or AI, right? And so the process started with me trying to evaluate what they had. And what I found was we needed massive investments in infrastructure. We had no modern infrastructure. So we can't go into AI without modern infrastructure. Now, that does not mean just go out to a vendor and buy a vendor infrastructure, right? It really means building out architectures, building out infrastructures that will future-proof you to get to AI. So that was the first step. The second step was really looking at their data. Most of the data that they collected was passive. It was simply for analytics. It was not for AI. So they began a whole journey on how to take the data and make it learning ready, AI ready, right? And then the third part was really applying AI to factories, which is completely operator driven and extremely manual, if you can think of it. And they have some cognitive automation, but very, very basic, right? 5 years later, we are lights off in our factories. AI runs a lot of our stuff. We have all of our modern infrastructure implemented, ready to go. I call it future-proofed to a point that I'm out of a job, which is good because now I'm sitting there maintaining these systems and doing more AI. That's kind of what the journey was like.
And you had mentioned a little earlier about how important it was to get the buy-in from the CEO. Like, can you talk a little bit about what that was like in not only getting the buy-in from the people at the top, but what that process was like getting the buy-in from the people all the way working in the lines?
Yeah, it was interesting because the CEO understood and the executive team understood that we needed to build a super highway. We lived in a traditional town where we had like traditional roads and we couldn't run the cars in those traditional roads. They understood that. But the people, that was a big deal. So one example I'll give you, all of our products, device physics products, goes to Apple. We build chips. Chips go into the iPhone. And so we used to do all these tests and we would go to Apple and Apple would come back and say, your test failed. And then we would go on a round chase trying to figure out how to do this, right? And so one of my EVPs, he came to me and he said, I want you to start predict these things so that we can go to Apple with 90% accuracy on the prediction. So initially, when I did the predictions and we had built the infrastructure, we were moving about 3 billion rows of data through this infrastructure. But our predictions are only 90% accurate. They are not 100% accurate, right? And so the people are sitting there going, we can't go to Apple and tell them there's 10% failures. We are experts in this domain. So outright rejection of AI technologies, right? And of anything that is mathematical in nature because there's a probability component to it, right? And so for 1 year, I sat in production side by side with the domain experts, and I kind of showed them what 90% of what they were doing, AI was already doing very, very well. They were predicting very well. So there was a 10% that AI was not doing that they had to do. So it was a domain that really saw that, and they converted. So when I started converting every domain expert, I got momentum, huge momentum.
Yeah, I remember we talked a little bit earlier about that augmentation versus automation, the idea of making those people more powerful and feeling more empowered. Do you think that's going to be critical as we begin to adopt IoT, edge technology at a massive scale?
Absolutely, because we humans cannot we were doing visual inspections of images, right? Can you imagine doing visual images inspection of 10 million images, right? They can't. So they do sampling. Right? And sampling is never perfect, right? You can miss with outliers, boundary conditions, and there's an imbalance in the data set. So you have to get to cognitive automation. And the way you get to cognitive automation is by leading. You have to show them what is possible, right? People were spending so much time on the weekend in the factories. They came to me and said, thank you, Janet, for giving me back the weekends. That was where it started, right? And so the mind shift happened when people started to see we humans can rise above level 0 jobs. And we can go to level 1 and level 2 and level 3. We've really got to figure out how to do that, right? Because we can't scale if we really just start doing every single test. And in the manufacturing industry, the return on investment is massive, right? So if we can predict 90% of our tests, that's 500 million in cost savings for us. 500 million. Right? So it's instant that we see the benefit, unlike any other industry, right? In search industry, you don't see that kind of return on investment. In manufacturing, you see it right away because you don't have to buy test equipment. You can manage with scale. You can rely on the testing for future learning. So you've learned all of this stuff. It's about the data, right? The data becomes rich and alive, right?
I think this is a perfect transition over to what the problem is.
Janet explained my business. So I just respond.
So a lot of this really is this overlap, the mind numbingness, the people, and how that affects the quality. Could you describe a little bit more about what your company does and the problem that you're solving and how you're going about it?
Yeah, so we are basically a food tech startup. And our focus is, from where we started was through spending a lot of time directly with processing facilities and coolers and distribution centers. We realized that, as you mentioned, sampling. If you all can imagine a big truck of strawberries for me, then when it leaves the farm and comes to the facility, only thing the organization can do is sampling, because you cannot look at every single box, but you do have to associate a quality and accept or reject that shipment based on that quality. So they'll randomly take 4, 5, 6 individual strawberry boxes, which is roughly 100 berries, and make an assessment by people who are trained to look for certain things like bruise or decay or whatever it is for that fruit characteristics. Now, the problem here is that it's an entirely subjective process, and hence the variations in the spikes, that's just always there, and there's no way for any organization to be consistent about these inspections. It's just not possible. Like if we gave you 1 box of strawberries to each of you and said, tell me what is the average red distribution, what are we going to do? You're going to say salmon red, dark red, light red, bright red, whatever. That's how we think, that's how we look. So we said, if we can make this quality assessment process objective, so that you only have 1 pair of eyes looking at it, as opposed to multiple pair of eyes as the food makes its transition from farm to the consumer, then there is a huge ROI from 2 perspectives. One is that you have brought operational efficiencies, you have brought consistencies, but there is one thing which is very, very important, but it's not direct, it's implicit, which is that if you get better at looking at quality, being predictive, then you are able to reduce the rejections, and thereby you're able to reduce food waste. Because what gets rejected makes it nowhere, right? Because in the B2B space of food supply chain, you're not going to put bad strawberries on the shelves, because that's not what a consumer wants. So when we talk about food waste, we always think of the consumer-driven food waste, right? We think about whatever is there in our refrigerators and we feel guilty. We should have done something better with that box, but a much bigger portion of that food waste comes from the industry, from the B2B, because of this acceptance rejection criteria or the claim management, which in turn is very directly correlated to food quality. So we said, this is what we are going to do at AgShift. We are going to make the process of food quality assessment better, faster, and objective for the entire supply chain to benefit. So that was our value proposition, and AI just happened to be the tool to do that. So we started from AI, lots of image processing, but we realized that it's very hard to have any kind of consistencies in the images when you're relying on smartphone-based solutions. Because you have different people, they have different habits, the way they hold the phone, whether you're taking the image inside or outside the facility. There are too many environmental variables to have like a normalized data set to do anything meaningful with AI. And the other part was you're talking about facilities. So you're talking about 1 inspection every 3 minutes, and multiply that by 500 facilities globally. So that volume is completely different, and it doesn't get served by smartphones. So that took us to IoT, where we built our own AI-enabled IoT analyzer, food quality analyzer, which we have named Hydra. So that's what got into IoT for us. So now we have pretty much like a kiosk device which sits in the processing facilities. You put the commodity you're trying to inspect, the system takes the image, gives you the result back from AI in under 20 seconds. So that's where we are at with the solution. So we have worked on strawberries. So now we have no appetite for strawberries. We know exactly what to look for. We have worked on cashews. So now, would you believe that cashews has 22 possible defects? Right? Wow. I want to make sure nobody has cashews and strawberries after they leave this place. Right? So those are the things we are doing. And one point which Janet touched upon is that if you think of things like blueberries, imagine the inspectors in the facilities actually counting the blueberries day in and day out. So that was, I love that part of yours where you said level 0 and level 1. Yeah. Nobody has to count blueberries in this day and age with where we have come with technology, but we are. And that's one example of how we are bringing those efficiencies through AgShift.
That's awesome. There's a couple things I wanted to touch on, and I can also vouch for this. When there was a tray of fruit and cookies outside, you went for the cookies. But there's a couple things that you said. So, and I think you're touching on a lot of this, that these are all just tools, right? Yeah. If it wasn't AI, you would have done something else. And it seems like you're very much the same way. You said something about you feel like you're future-proofed. So as edge technology and some of these new technologies are emerging, what do you mean by that as you set up Western Digital to be ready for what's coming?
Yeah, so to me, the architecture is super critical in whether you will be future-proofed or not. Because, see, with the world of software that I came from, or the world of distributed computing that I came from, we constantly migrated software, migrated vendors in and out, put all this collage of things together. We didn't build it correctly. There was no mix and match, proper layer, proper abstraction layers. We didn't bring our data together into a data lake. We didn't send our data up the stack correctly. We made a lot of mistakes. And I think that people are still making that mistakes as they go into the big data and AI. And those mistakes are very big price to pay going forward. I saw a lot of people talking about new platforms because, the vendors, the innovators are coming out and saying, okay, this data has to be unified for different purposes. Let's give you a platform to do that because you're too slow to build it yourself. And I think organizations have to realize fast and quick. And it's a matter of skill set because you really have to get the right people in there to get your architecture right, to get your foundation of your house, the flow plan. It must work for AI, for BI, and for other things you want to do, like advanced neural networks, for example, right? And what I found in Western Digital was most of your BI, AI can do. Right. Whereas I was told, we need separate BI because we are so used to the way BI is done. Pretty much 80%, 90% of our BI right now is cognitively automated, right? And then we use the same data sets for learning. We use the same data sets for training. Now, we do run into the data sparsity problem, right? And we also have a whole data imbalance issues. We have people that are collecting the data and the factories don't know that I'm sitting at the other end trying to do AI on this data, right? And so they're just collecting data with no information on how this data is going to be used up front, right? And so that process has to change. The whole data collection process, how we're going to collect data, how we're going to measure data at the get-go, whether it's healthy enough to serve us at the back end. The data that's coming out of IoT, for example, no human touch. I don't want any humans touching the data, right? The data comes out of my IoT, it goes into my data lake. And like what she talked about, we also had these issues with edge versus the cloud because, these systems, in Western Digital being a 40-year-old company, our systems are only able to transfer 2 megabits per second data. So we physically FedExed our data over to the US. Wow. Could you imagine that in this day and age, like literally 5 years ago, we FedExed our data and moved them through different places, right? Because we could not move it through the 2 megabits per second. And so we had to come up with very clever, future-proofed architecture, cloud versus edge. Whatever data we collect is on the edge. It's replicated to the cloud. It's replicated to other geolocations. We learn and we're ready for 5G when 5G comes in, right? But we can't say we're going to sit back and FedEx these data. Right. There's no 5G today. We live in a practical world, right?
Yeah, and so that's, even from our perspective, very exciting. Like, we deal with a lot of our clients are out in technically the middle of nowhere. And so they don't even think that any of this is even possible, so they don't bother to look at it at all. So I think it's cool to see that you guys got creative around it, found a way to do it, but the implications could be much larger for folks that families would be left behind, communities would be left behind. So that's really exciting. So I know you had...
No, I wanted to touch on that point on the image and how you just take it for the sake of taking it. So when we started, we met one of the organizations and we said we need images for AI. So we have thousands of images. So I was super excited that day. Like, wow, okay, I already have images. I just need to focus on building the models. Then I get the images. So, you have a berry with a raincoat. You have a berry mixed with cashews. You have a berry on a dining table. You have a berry with the inspector's jacket all around it. The point is, we said, we can't use it. Like, what do you mean? These are images. So the point is the thing is that you need to have clean, curated, labeled, very, very, good quality of data set. And honestly, after this journey, I have realized you can keep building AI models whole day long. right? It's the sanctity of the data, which is the nightmare. And older is the industry, tougher is the battle, right?
Yes.
Because if I went to food inspection companies today, not me, even if it was, pick any company logo you want to, right? The problem is no data exists, because this company which had these images with the shoes and the raincoats, it is one of the innovators in the ag tech space. So you can imagine that no matter how deep your bank account is, if you wanted to bring AI to solve the issues in the food supply chain, you will have to start from the absolute bottom, because no one has images stored anywhere in any facility. So at least you could FedEx it. I can't do even that.
We were FedExing crap.
But it's a serious problem, right?
Yeah,
So the manufacturers are behind, but I mean, agriculture, like you can't get older than that.
It doesn't exist, right? So what am I going to do? As like I said, at least you could find one thing out of a million.
Yes.
It doesn't exist for me.
So do you think that's, maybe we need to be more deliberate around educating some of the folks within this space? Like, how have you done that with some of your clients? Like through this, do you now approach new potential clients in a different way?
See, the thing is that even if we educated them to collect the data, if they don't have that right consistent environment, then again, you're back to the same problem, right? So the way we did it is we actually shadowed we just camped in the processing facilities of our customers day in and day out. We were eating their food. We were picking strawberries from their farm, and in the process, we were collecting data set, because we at least wanted to build, so there's this notion of seed data set, right? You want to have a baseline to do something. Once that baseline is done, then the idea is that you can take it to a lot of other customers, and they don't have to start from scratch because we have the baseline, right? So when we take on a new commodity, then it's like wild, wild west, right? Because you're just trying to figure out the whole thing. But once we have a baseline, then we go to other customers for the same commodity. It's a much easier journey.
Right. No, and so part of what both of you are describing, and it seems like you've come from similar backgrounds and then had to break your way into some of these different industries.
Yes.
How challenging do you think that's going to be in the future? And do you think we're going to hit a tipping point where the technology will become so prevalent that everybody understands that they need to start doing this? Are you optimistic?
I'm very optimistic. So the way I've solved that problem was very interesting. So I don't have time, but I'm going to try to compress it in real fast. So anyway, going to the factories, again, no data, right? So how do you do AI? No data. So what I found out was Googles and Yahoos of the world, they have millions of cat images, authoritative cat images to train on. Factories, zero. No authoritative data to train on. But there's hope. New technology has come in, which Google has invented, GANs, right? Generative adversarial networks. Generative adversarial networks, the difference between that versus traditional AI, generative adversarial networks will help you create. So up until then, you could predict Picasso art by teaching AI what Picasso art looked like. But now, you can create Picasso art. Create, right? So this helps us a lot because we can go in there and start creating data that we want for training purposes. And so I was able to go into the factory, get all the domain experts, and really standardize on what bad data look like, what good data look like. And then I used that as the base set to create massive amounts of real data, synthetic data. And then I used that to predict what my failures would look like, right? But this is still so new, and it's difficult because these GANs are not full-fledged optimized. So you spend a lot of time optimizing the GANs, but where I think the world will go is they will tap into the GANs and other type of AI that will really help. Now, this is scary because AI is starting to create, right? So it's getting into the human area, the human territory. But when AI can create for the industry, for the business, it's different from when AI is creating my record. Right? That I would worry about. But if AI is creating sample data to train so that manufacturing can be very good, that's actually a very good use of GANs. But I've been successfully able to use GANs to solve my problem. And this is very recent. So I'm just starting to talk about and publish this work We just finished, we rolled it out in Malaysia factories, and the Malaysia people call me every night at 9 p.m. I was talking about this, right? Every dinner I get a call because they're so excited about the GANs working in the factories, and it's helping the operator because it actually predicts very successfully, and the operator doesn't have to worry about what images they're getting.
Did you feel because you took the time to work with them and treated them as domain experts that they were more accepting of the technology?
Absolutely. You know, for us, the people at the factories, these are device physics people, right? They're very, very smart to get out with, but they're actually doing low-end tasks, right? Packaging an SSD, looking at beard failures on a device that they can't really completely understand, right? And as she said, you know, the cucumber farmers in Japan are using CNN very well. I went to Japan to roll out our CNN in the factories for image analysis, and I was mugged by the cucumber farmers, right? And I said, if the cucumber farmers can do it, there's hope for all of us, right? So the industry can definitely adapt with newer technologies.
And so I think we're about to wrap up, but I just wanted to kick it over to you, being a startup, building a new company off of all of this new and emerging technology. Where do you think the limits are going to be with this technology, and where do you hope that we'll be in 10 years?
I think, at least for the food industry, I feel it has exponentially changed even from 2016. When I started AgShift in 2016, I literally had to knock on the door multiple times to tell customers that what is the value, because you cannot have an AI conversation with certain verticals, and this is one of that. And it should not be an AI conversation, right? It's like, this is your problem, this is how I can solve it for you. But now I'm seeing a significant difference because I think the food supply chain is facing tremendous issues. We all know about food wastage. You cannot create more land. We all know about labor shortage. You just can't find people. So, you know, I was at a conference last week, Thrive, and Driscoll's, who is one of our premier customers we are working with on strawberries, they stood on the stage and said, my number one problem, number two problem, number three problem is labor. Because you have farms full of strawberries, perfect berries, there's no one to pick it up. Talk about food wastage, right? So I think the organizations are waking up to the fact that if not entirely, some portion of these massive problems which we are facing can be solved by technology, right? So now that openness is there, that, okay, tell me what you got, and at least they give you the attention. So I think it's on the curve where as some technology offerings can mature and really prove the point, because it's a tough industry, right? If you're not proven and you try to talk to a farmer, you know, the best example is you go to a farm, meet the grower, give him an app, and say this will help you farm. Try it just for fun, right? Like you are telling the farmer something which you do on a daily basis for last 40 years, I have this mobile app and it will help you do it better. Because the reason the doors get closed is because nothing has been proven. There's no ROI, there's no way to prove that it can really help me irrigate better or faster. So once we cross that chasm, which I think we will, then the industry will be open, and openness has to happen for technology to break through and solve some of these problems. Like I told John, I don't want to solve the entire food wastage, but I want to solve 1% of it, right? And that's enough. That's enough to start and motivate rest of the entrepreneurs that it's doable. It can be done, and not close our minds to technology and food. Why are you doing that? Why don't you go and do a mobile gaming app? Because you have 10 years in mobile. This was literally the feedback I had when I started AgShift. Right?
Wow.
So I want to change that.
No, and I think both of you are, and when we talked earlier, I mean, the way to view this is an adventure.
This is an adventure.
Hey, John,
So-
we've gone into other sessions time, so no one's going to
problem.
leave here and make it. So there is some time before the reception. I'm just wondering if there are any questions from the audience you'd like to take. Okay, let me just come there with the mic.
Hi, so I was just wondering, how do you guys take into account like a human bias while training data? For example, a strawberry might be excellent to one person, but the same strawberry might be like average condition to another one.
Right. So a couple of things. One is that since it's industry level defect detection, which we are doing, So the people who train the system to say this is a bruise or this is a decay, they are the domain experts, right? That's one difference. The other difference is we try to normalize it because there will still be biases. That's why we are there as a first step, right? So at least for the training, what we do is we normalize it by having 3 or 4 inspectors look at that physical fruit and then build a curve to see which one actually makes it in the most common set, and then only take that common set for training, right? So our training goes well, but then when you come to the validation, right, then it's again the same problem in the reverse direction, right? So the system is saying this is a bruise. Now we got to cross-check it with a room full of experts to agree or disagree, right? So it's a very difficult problem, which you have touched on. Either way, you cannot get rid of the subjective bias, but you can just bring it to the point where you can plot the maps to standard deviations and things like that and say that, okay, statistically, it's correct, and we move forward from there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree. I would just say get the data to be as diverse as possible, get it to be from as mixed a location as possible, get as much diversity in domain experts. Sometimes 2 domain experts don't agree on failure data, so you get more group of people. So the 2 levels, validation phase and also curation at the very start, right? But our data process is terribly imbalanced, right? That's where the issue is. It's not in AI, it's not in the other parts. It's the platform. Can your platform support the scale of data you want to train and learn from? Can it eliminate the bias, help you with eliminating the bias, and then the role of collaboration of humans in the process?